All right, well, welcome to the Chandler Museum. I want to thank you all for coming and spending your Friday evening here with us for Voices of Chandler Podcast Live, The Intel Effect. I'm Jody Crago, I'm the Museum Administrator here, and we're joined by Ninette Vaz. Let me describe a little bit what Voices of Chandler Podcast Live is. So this was a speaker series funded by City Council last year during the budget cycle. And it was a desire to create a speaking series around the city that would focus on business, arts and culture in the community. And so when it came time for the museum to do one, we thought about talking about one of the greatest impacts in our history and culture that we could really think of, both business culture and community culture, and that's Intel. So we reached out to Ninette, and I wanted to share her story. So with that, let me read her bio, and then we will recognize, first of all, let me recognize Vice Mayor Terry Rowe is here in the audience. Thank you very much. And thank you for the funding to have this process go forward. Ninette Vaz is the Senior Director of Supply Chain for Intel Foundry Services, is an Intel veteran of more than 30 years. Ninette serves as co-chair of Intel's Arizona Site Leadership Committee. She was a charter lead to Intel Arizona as a great place to work and an asset to the community. Ninette has a deep belief in the value of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is a known advocate and a member and a mentor to many. She graduated from Arizona State University with a BS in supply chain and a master's degree in business and administration, and she lives in Ahwatukee with her husband and 2 sons. So let's start all the way at the beginning, and let's ask you this question. What is your Intel story? What brought you to this seat to talk about Intel today?
So it's hard to believe that it's actually, I just celebrated my 34-year anniversary, May 1st at Intel, and I never thought that that's what I was going to do for 34 years, but it's been an amazing, amazing journey. So one of the things that I thought about is, how did I end up at Intel? And I remember I had just graduated. I was like any recent college graduate looking for jobs, and I was talking to many companies all over the place. And my background, I'm one of the few Intel people who's not an engineer. People always ask me, are you an engineer? No, I'm not. Intel has all kinds of people at Intel of different backgrounds and professions. And I was looking for a job. I had a few different options. One of the options I was really interested in was a 150-year-old company located in Wisconsin. So I was really interested in them, but I ended up going there in December. And after that, I decided I wouldn't go there. So instead, I chose this very little-known, kind of new company called Intel. They were fairly new to Arizona. So I joined in '89. The Chandler area actually got started just shortly before that. In fact, a funny story. My offer was not for the Chandler site, but it was for the Deer Valley location. Just a quick show of hands, did people know that Intel was in Deer Valley? Yeah, a couple of people. Yeah, more, yeah. So I got my offer, it said Deer Valley, I'm like, oh gosh, I used to live in Tempe. Mm-hmm. So what happened, like Intel, it's very adaptive and things changed. 3 or 4 days before I started, I got a new offer, and I got moved to the Chandler facility here. So I was in a building that was there called CH3 many, many years ago.
Yeah. So let's set the site there. So Intel first came to Chandler in 1977. The Arizona Republic reported that they were surprised that Intel was moving to Chandler and what it was going to bring. The town was very excited. Up to that point, Chandler really was still an agricultural community. We were about 12,000 people, and so this was going to have a big effect. And one of the first places they built was at Ray and Rural on a piece of property that is actually connected to this site as well. So you're at the Chandler Museum, but you're also next to the McCullough Price House, which was owned by Art Price. Art Price was a nephew of Dr. Chandler. He married Dr. Chandler's niece. He was also the first city attorney for Chandler. and he purchased ranch lands out here, and he purchased this house. His land is actually some of the very first land that Intel sits in, so it's kind of appropriate to talk about that history in connection with the site where we are tonight. But that being said, Intel immediately had a big effect on Chandler as people from Santa Clara and elsewhere came to reside in Chandler. So I think you have a couple stories about that.
Yeah. So it's funny you talked about what the site looked like in the beginning. I remember when the Chandler Boulevard was called Williamsfield Road. And I lived in Tempe, and I was coming south, headed this way, and it felt like I was going to Tucson, actually. It felt like I was driving, like, what is down here? It was very, there was a lot of farmland still around. And so we just recently celebrated our 40-year anniversary. A gentleman in the audience has a T-shirt from the 40-year anniversary that we celebrated. And when we did that, one of the things we did is we had an interview with one of our CEOs, Craig Barrett, who has a long foundation here in Arizona and still has roots in Arizona. But he was talking about, he was here before I was, and he was talking about a story that the site, we bought a lot of land and we only used a portion of it for a few buildings. So we ended up leasing out some of the land to a local farmer, and we let them use the land at the time. Apparently, the farmer decided to plant some onions, and during harvest season, when you're pulling the onions out, it was a very strong smell. And we had the fab going at the time, and there was this big concern. There was all the engineers were going about making sure that there wasn't going to be an impact on the yield rate because of the odor from the. Was anyone here during that time, by the way? Anyone here? No. It's a very interesting story when he did that. I have another story from another CEO that I'll share that touches my heart actually deeply. So I was pretty early on in my career. I had gone to this event. It's called the Intel Manufacturing Excellence, IMIC, if some of you know of it. And you go to it, and it's a big event, and I was fairly young in my career, and I actually was doing an exhibit. And the exhibit doors were closed, and the dignitaries were brought in before they opened the doors up for everybody. And so Andy Grove walked in with his wife next to him, and they kind of looked around. They walked in the door, looked around, like, where should we start? And he said, I was kind of in the front, and he looked over at her and said, where should we start? And he said, let's go start over there. There's two women. She said, let's go start over there. There's two women on that exhibit. And this was in the days that in high tech, there weren't a lot of women. So I think that's the beginning of the diversity and inclusion and encouraging women and other minorities to develop and come up. I just love that moment for two reasons. One, he asked her and he listened to his wife. So
absolutely. So maybe you can speak to, like, we're talking about that earliest period of Intel's history, the 77 to the early 80s. I mean, by the time the 80s roll around, Chandler has grown almost twice, so it's 25,000 people at that point. But what was one of the things, or what was the reason that Intel even thought about moving to Chandler?
Yeah. Well, I always say Intel believes, like if you look at where our locations are, we really want to be a part of the community. So we want to grow with the community. And here, it has the university, it has the space. We knew we were going to grow. We had high aspirations. So, and the support of the local, the government and the community believes and wanted to develop the education system, et cetera. So we felt it was very symbiotic. And certainly it's proven to be. I don't know if they ever thought it was going to turn out the way it is.
Right.
But it clearly has been a great success.
Sure. Yeah, so to that point, at the time, city council leaders and others were having this conversation about we need to find a way to diversify that agricultural background. Rogers, another high-tech corporation, had come in the 60s, but there hadn't been a large influx of other high-tech companies. And so when Intel starts to arrive, then other high-tech manufacturers and producers start to show some interest in the region, not just Chandler, but also Tempe and elsewhere. So it really did have a huge impact. And that's when you start to see the population of Chandler start to take this skyrocketing because not only are people coming to work at Intel, but they're coming for support services, they're coming, family members of other people and those kinds of things. You really start to see it grow. So then we have a transition when they start to build some additional campuses, correct?
Yeah, so I believe it was 94 when I was in the Chandler site, and there was a big announcement that there's going to be this new location, this new site. It was a very, very big deal for all the employees there. They hired buses, and the entire site went to the Ocotillo location, which is our biggest site now. And it was greenfield. It was fields. There was nothing there. And we all got in our buses. We went out there, and there was a podium and some announcements and groundbreaking, but nothing out there. I live in Ahwatukee. I can see our factory from Ahwatukee now. I mean, the size of it, the magnitude of it, and it was a real point of sense of pride because we were committing to investing in Arizona even more.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what you see up here is you see some of the early bunny suit folks, right, dressed up. Let's go ahead, just a couple other pictures. This is the actual first campus, the campus that is up on Chandler. And then if we go a little bit further, now you're starting to see some of the other developments. Keep going.
There's the building I was in, my first building.
And then keep going. Yeah, that's Craig Barrett right there. That's the first CEO that you were mentioning, and had a big impact on becoming of Chandler. So
I have a couple stories about him as well. So some of you might remember the airlines, America West Airlines. A few, head nods. So before, we now have an Intel shuttle that goes to our major sites, a plane. But before that, and I was in finance, by the way, I did an analysis that said, hey, maybe it's a good idea if we do something different rather than spending all this money jumping on commercial flights. Because I used to be on a weekly basis heading to San Jose, and Craig Barrett used to be heading to San Jose every week. So we ended up having an office right next to each other when we worked together, and I've been here for 6 CEOs. Wow. And every one of them brought a special talent to our company. But Craig was definitely the one with the roots, deep roots here in Arizona.
So as we're moving forward, this is the Ocotillo campus, the start of it. We can see the monument sign, and you'll see some of the additional signs. The groundbreaking, the ribbon cutting back there was Mayor Tipshraeny and Craig Barrett together in one of his previous, as you can tell by his youthful look, one of the previous mayorships. But by the time we get to the 90s and the 2000s, we really start to see Intel take off, right? Because even culturally, right, there's references to the Pentiums in songs and movies and all those kinds of things. So talk about the growth at that point.
Yeah, the growth, we were, myself just as an employee there, the amount of work, the progress, the hiring that was going on was dramatic. One of the things I wanted to mention too, this site, Arizona, is very diverse. It has manufacturing, obviously, from all those buildings and the factories, but just about every other function. We have engineering, we have marketing, we have finance, we have support groups like IT. So when you build a factory and you build a business, you have the growth in all areas, we continue to be one of the sites that has a focus on leading business development and technology innovation too. Some of the work that we did, the early work that we did in autonomous driving started here in Arizona. Cool. And we continue to be a point of some of the more innovative work. And people sometimes don't realize where it started because oftentimes it branches out into our sites that cross to other locations as well.
Sure. So also at this 90s time frame, the city was also trying to reinvest in Intel as well. Up to that point, the Brewers, you may have remembered in the 80s when the Brewers had their spring training facility down south, they started at the late 80s, early 90s, became interested in having a new stadium, and the leadership at that point said, yeah, I don't think that's where we want to put our money, and they began to invest in the Price Road corridor. Putting in the infrastructure and the lines of the different types of gases and electricity and water needed to continue to allow Intel and others to grow. So I think that the city's leadership also was reacting to the investment that Intel was pouring into all of those factors at the time.
Yeah, and it's so certainly we're pouring it into the factories, but if you think of the impact on that, there's 1,000 other businesses that are suppliers that are locally based here in Arizona. We definitely believe in investing and bringing up the local market, and that's one of the reasons why we look in locations that we can really have it grow and invest from the beginning. The other thing I wanted to mention too is just the community work we do right from the beginning, from my early days, volunteering and investing personal time, group time. A lot of our team building events at Intel are volunteer events. And Intel has always been very committed to giving back to the community and encouraging charitable giving to the schools and other communities that need it. And so that's a really big part of it. So we're giving financially to our suppliers and to the economy that supports it, but we're also giving to the community because we believe in it. We always say we work here, but we live here too.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great segue too, right? Because like many of the people in the audience, some of them are from Intel, but others have connections or people. It seems like everybody you run into, right, is either I know somebody who works in Intel, or I worked at Intel, or a family member worked in Intel. So like it really does mean the community starts to have that family aspect when it comes to a company like Intel.
Yeah, so the team building events that we do, so that's another aspect of Intel that is wonderful. I was talking with a few people, like our celebrations over the years. I remember our 25-year anniversary celebration, which was a huge blowout, but there's so many others in between. And I always say too, the memories, some of you, if you have a personal connection to Intel, you just remember the people that you've gotten to know over the years. I've been to weddings and baby showers, and you're a part of people's lives as you grow with Intel. And I think there's a community, you mentioned that almost every here probably either has worked at Intel or knows. Show of hands, how many people worked at Intel? Oh, that's so cool, that's awesome. How many people know someone who has worked at Intel? Okay, all right. So yeah, but in the early days, it wasn't that way. So it definitely grew because in the beginning it was, what is that company? You know, and then now, you know, your grandmother knows who Intel is. So yeah.
So talk a bit about how, maybe from your perspective, as you've been, supply chain, and how has the business changed, right? I think when Intel first started, it was in memory, and then it went into chips, and it has continued to evolve. So like, how has that business changed? Yeah,
well, in the area that I'm in, certainly in supply chain, it's changed very dramatically, especially recently with COVID and recognizing how important our chips are to everybody's life around the world. So before, we are more and more global in nature, for sure, but we also have a need to develop the ecosystems around us, because as we do, there's a responsibility to those companies that we've started and given back to. So we're broadening our scope more and more into new areas and new technologies. There's no semiconductor area that we're not in, or at least we're indirectly utilizing for our work. So it's a very broad area now, and if you look around, it's sometimes you look at the types of engineers that we have, every possible area and discipline. Software is very big now. In fact, we hire more software engineers than some software companies do. So it's much more diverse than we used to. It's much more global in nature than we used to be.
Okay, sure. So again, we'll talk about sort of some of that growth of Intel, right? We were talking about the 90s and how there was a lot of growth as chips got bigger, faster, or maybe smaller, I should say. Smaller with more computation capabilities in smaller pieces. But as we get to the Obama era, when President Obama was here, he came and visited the Intel site in 2012 because he was announcing a $6 billion investment that Intel was making at the time just as we were heading into a fairly big global recession, right? And some tough times for Intel at the time, right? So talk about that.
Yeah. We have a history of not trying to save our way through a tough time. We believe in investing, and even as we're going through what we're going through now, it's been a tough time with COVID, et cetera. But we always believe that the use of our semiconductors are getting to be more and more important. So you have to invest. Our factories take a long time to be built. So you got to be looking far in advance in order to meet that growing demand. And even now, obviously, the demand for semiconductors has gone through the roof, and all the shortages that are around the world. And we're, as you know, investing very heavily right now.
20 billion, I believe.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes. Yeah, and so it is a risky business. We got to believe in it, and you got to put all your money down and go for it full force. And what's nice is we have a lot of people in the community backing us up as well and supporting us as we go after the challenges that we have ahead and the things that we've done. But in my 30 years, I've seen. You mentioned the Pentium situation. Yeah. I was involved. I was on the phone during the Pentium flaw, helping recover from that, and we did it. So I think we have a history of stepping up and dealing with the challenges head on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the impressive thing, right? So as the global recession, impacted all sorts of businesses, and businesses changed all over the world. Just like you said, Intel was busy reinventing and reinvesting and continuing to develop, so that at the point when the global pandemic hits, and then suddenly all of us need all sorts of connectivity that we didn't know before, right? Suddenly every child needs a computer with multiple chips in it, right? So that they can just go to school. That is at that point when Intel got a new CEO, right? And announced a new strategy. Can you touch on that?
Yeah. So Pat Gelsinger is our CEO, and he was at Intel, and he came back to Intel, and it was nice to see him come back. He definitely brought a lot of energy back into the company, which we needed. So he announced something called IDM 2.0. And it was during the pandemic. I was working from home like some workers, and that don't have to be on site for factory work. And in March of 21, we announced that we were doing IDM 2.0, which included moving into the Intel Foundry Services business. And that happens to be the group that I am now in. Right. It was very cool because I was at the Akatia site, hadn't been on campus for a long time, and there was this big announcement and this big investment of what we're going to do. It's a strategy that recognizes that we have a responsibility to support the various customers and the various customers' needs. Sometimes it's the IDM piece and our own Intel manufacturing, and sometimes we can use other people's designs and still service them.
So what does IDM stand for?
So let's see if I get this right. It is Intel Direct Manufacturing. So I think it's right. It's basically we're building our own design, our own chips that we offer. But we also know that there's a lot of different requirements out there in the world, and there's a lot of other companies that might have products that they also want our expertise to build it for them and help them improve on it. So this opens that window up to do it to do both. And get more chips out there for all the different needs that are needed in this environment.
Cool. Yeah, because like when we were talking about this in advance, we were talking about how everything has a chip now, right? Like your refrigerator, your Fitbit, your everything has multiple chips. It was one of the funny things when I was looking back and doing some preliminary research when they're announcing that Intel's coming in 1977. They announced how they make chips, and soon you'll find chips, maybe as many as 6 chips in a car. Now think about that. 6 chips in a car. That's kind of a funny idea, right? Because there's literally thousands. But that being said, so what's as you continue to transform and continue to look ahead, where are we headed? Where's Intel headed as we move forward?
Yeah, I think we're playing a very important role for the world right now, because we're making sure that our chips are available and secure for the world. So we are putting ourselves out there in a very visible way in order to make sure that there's access to the chips that power the students, power the education system, power the hospitals, and that it's not a constraint. We are so dependent on that there's a need to continue to invest in that area. And we really believe, like, the future is bright. There's going to be, challenges that we deal with, like always, but we'll deal with them. And I think it's shown that sometimes you don't really know what the future will bring, but as long as the community, our employees, everyone works together, we can overcome it. And so there's a definite excitement in the air of where we're going, and we're attracting lots of people back. I always like to say Intel's a wonderful place to work. If you have kids, if you're interested, go check out the jobs. There's a variety out there. They're not just engineers,
Right.
And I'm one who can prove it that it's more than just engineers at Intel.
Absolutely. So, I think as the city talks about the excitement of Intel as it's looking forward, and knowing that those demands and that new approach, right, of trying to serve other customers as well as your own construction. I know I asked what's in the future, but I guess my point is, what are some of the challenges that you expect to face as we're going into the next 5-10 years?
We are having some areas that we have to do some more investment in and develop some new technology. There's other areas, there's competition all around us for sure. But the strategy that we have is bold, and the people that we are hiring and the people that are coming back to Intel as well. It's very interesting watching. There are people from all over the industry who are coming back to Intel. And that is inspiring to me, because people are saying, I want to be a part of this. It's like it's another era of Intel. A new chapter, and what we can achieve together could be pretty amazing. There's definitely a sense of, one of the things our CEO talks about is moving at a torrid pace. We're very focused on being agile, learning, adjusting. It's the kind of things that you say to your kids, that, be nimble, adjust when you need to, and I think we're doing it every day. Learning from our mistakes as well, right, along the way. But it's, we are very committed to Arizona. We continue to invest, and then we're investing in other places in the world, but we're not forgetting Arizona, and that's obvious too. So I think it's a long history that we have here, and the investments with the universities and with communities continues to happen. I think that'll continue to grow as well.
So one of the things in your bio that you talk about is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And obviously, I can say when you talk about a community and how Intel has changed, Chandler is one of the most diverse communities in all of Arizona. And it's in part due to the influx of all types of workers to work in Chandler, to live in Chandler because of this. So talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that Intel uses.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It's, as I said, it's dear to my heart. I've seen it myself, how the landscape of Chandler, the landscape of Intel has changed over time. We are very committed. We have programs or groups called employee resource groups. And we have, we want the person to be seen, is what we say. And so there's resource groups with every possible interest and background or religion, and it really encourages people to find their home and then share their experiences. One of the very wonderful things that's happening lately is ERG groups that might have different beliefs are actually partnering together to learn about each other, and that we're investing in that, helping them and encouraging them to do that.
Yeah, build community amongst differences.
The other thing I'll say too is Intel has been a leader in the area of equal pay. We were one of the first companies that came out and sort of published our information. So, and then pretty soon other high-tech companies started to do that. We believe in looking at the data. We're a data-driven company, and showing the data, recognizing the areas that we need to improve, and publicly showing that and showing the progress over time. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you all for coming. I think this is a really interesting topic because the museum here. Oftentimes we talk about history, but we often also talk about culture, the thing that makes this town what it is. And it's all of people's stories. It's not just the people that founded this place, but it's also the people that came here to work. It's all their stories. That's what this podcast is about Chandler people telling their stories, right? So I would certainly encourage you all to think about sharing a story. Maybe it's with your neighbor, maybe it's with your family, or maybe it's even with us here at the museum where you could tell your story to us and we can help preserve it. It's all of these people that you look around that really make this community great. It's great companies like Intel that help make it great as well. But yes, I really want to thank you. I want to thank you, Ninette, for sharing your story. Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to really thank all of you for coming here, because it is pretty amazing that on a Friday night, all these people wanted to hear about Intel and Chandler, and it really touches my heart because it's a good part of my history. And just thank you for coming and listening to the stories. And I want to hear more of your stories as we maybe mingle for a little while.
All right, so with that's a great